Just to alert you that that's in your email. She's a Jamaican trained teacher who's living abroad. So what I would like to do, even though we haven't read it yet, is just to confirm whether or not we will accept this late submission. Yes, yes. Okay, members, sorry, it looks like I went a bit too far, too fast. I want to recommit our agenda again and begin from the point of prayer. Dr. Gordon, could I ask you just to offer a word of prayer?
Let us pray. Thank you, Lord, for bringing us together this morning another time to review those matters that concern us and concern the welfare of our country. Give us thy wisdom, peace, and understanding through Jesus Christ, our Lord. Amen.
Thank you, Dr. Gordon. Members, I'm going to ask that we take the minutes at the end of the meeting. Thank you. So now we will go right into matters for discussion. And today we have oral presentations on submissions on the bill from our homeschooling family. And they're here this morning with us in Parliament. So I am going to call on whoever is the lead presenter to please introduce your group. So just allow them to introduce, could you introduce yourselves and say who you are and which submission, yes.
No. Right, so I am here, my name is Shane Pant and I represent the Jamaica Association of Homeschoolers. Then we have other families here as well. Right. Sure. Would you like the other families to introduce themselves as well? You may go ahead.
Good day, and thank you for having us. My name is Lyndall Vitale. I represent my wife and I. And we also have the McNish family and the Murphy family.
All right, so we'll be hearing from the Panton family, our first presenter. All right, please go ahead.
All right. Thanks again for allowing us to be here. A pleasant morning to you, Madam Chair, and of course to the rest of the committee members. We really appreciate the opportunity, and of course welcome to those who are here, other persons who are here physically and virtually. We, the Jamaica Association of Homeschoolers, a friendly society, are unequivocally grateful for the opportunity to express the position of homeschoolers in relation to the JTC Bill 2022. Let us first establish that as a community of families, we have the utmost respect for the expected role that schools play in the development of our nation's children and the service they provide to our families. We appreciate the arduous work of teachers and instructors in training our children and the self-sacrificial approach many teachers display. In addition, we are fully aware that without a regulatory framework, anarchy will result. We applaud, therefore, efforts to establish a set of guidelines that are motivated by moral law and promote interdependence. It is through the collaborative, objective, and deliberate efforts of all parties involved that the appropriate laws will be framed and the country will be appropriately served. In true homeschool fashion, the homeschool community's concerns with the bill being discussed today will be expressed from a panoramic view. We will highlight a few key areas of debate, but we must examine the broader picture to capture the heart of the issue that we all share a mutual concern for, the development of our children. We will provide recommendations that are in line with the aim of the bill, solutions that will help to address the root of the matter. It is the unwavering position of the Jamaica Association of Homeschoolers that the bill, as it is written now, undermines the rights and freedoms of parents and by extension the rights of the family. Rights and freedoms given to us by the Almighty, further supported in our nation's laws. Secondly, the bill trivializes the role and responsibility of parents in the development of their own children. Thirdly, the bill nullifies, though maybe not intentionally, the efforts already made by other state agencies and the success realized by persons who consistently supplement learning either for economic gain or voluntarily. Section 4, subsection 1, item E of the JTC bill inappropriately and awkwardly inserts the parent as one such person to whom the regulations should apply. This presents a divergence in the very admirable scope and objectives of the bill to promote teaching as a profession and to improve teaching and learning. The parent is the sole individual on that list who performs the role of instructor and facilitator of learning voluntarily. The other individuals are monetizing their learned skill of teaching. Yet, the bill in section 4, subsection 2, excludes people who teach voluntarily on an ad hoc basis. We therefore recommend that the reference to parents in section 4, subsection 1, be excluded from the bill. The Child Care and Protection Act, section 3b, states that 1, while parents often need help in caring for children, help should give support to the autonomy and integrity of the family unit and wherever possible be provided on the basis of mutual consent. 2, the least restrictive and disruptive course of action that is available and appropriate in a particular case to help a child should be followed. This act clearly upholds the sovereignty of the family as an institution and the responsibility of parents within that family to make decisions in the best interest of their children. It has long been established that having an involved parent can be a validating experience for a child, as reiterated by the British Psychological Society in an article entitled The Parent Connection. While the article limited the context of the discussion to language development in children, there is a plethora of research to substantiate this fact in all areas of the child's development. Why then should parents be mandated to seek authorization from the state? Why seek authorization when the state has already determined that the role of caring for children is fundamentally that of the parent? Why seek authorization when we can see that caring for includes teaching and guiding? Rather, parents should be supported and guided where there is lack of support from the community or maladaptive behavior on the part of parents. We therefore recommend that Section 29, subsection 3 and 4, and its references to homeschool parents be excluded from the bill. The Child Care and Protection Act, Section 2, Part 3b and c states that a family is the preferred environment for the care and upbringing of children, and the responsibility for the protection of children rests primarily with the parents. If with available support services, a family can provide a safe and nurturing environment for a child, support services should be provided. The role of the parent in raising their own children is fundamental to the effective functioning of any society. The responsibilities that are associated with carrying out this role must not be taken for granted. Let's consider the comments made and images displayed in a recent video created by a popular television station entitled Schools Under Siege. Here, communicated with embarrassing precision, were the consequences of bad parenting on the minds and behavior of children. It was admitted that children come from homes where there is conflict between one set of adults and another set of adults that filters to the children, and that there were other issues in the home environment that spill over into school. It was concluded that school had become that petri dish where all of these competing elements are coming to bear on the behavior of children in school. The degradation of the moral fiber of society creates a cyclical effect where children in school displaying severely violent and sexually obscene behavior is both a reflection of the home and social environment and contributes to further socioeconomic destruction, evidenced by teenage pregnancy, spousal and parental abuse, gang violence, and other egregious crimes. The breakdown in family values and the inability of parents to perform their role as an apt instructor is directly linked with maladaptive and antisocial behavior in children. Now, we may be quick to conclude that this is the very reason for imposing further restrictions for parents, but I will hasten to remind you that the parents of the children in these horrific scenes are not homeschooling. In fact, in the words of Barbara Blake Hannah, OD, in her book, Home, the First School, parents who choose to homeschool are parents who love their children deeply and want the best for them. She confidently stated, homeschool children have always been the practice's best advertising. At home, the child is far removed from the dangerous influences and schoolyard bullying, the dun and bling culture, early sexual experience, religious intolerance, the overcrowded transport system, random street crime, and violence. The role of parents should not be confused with that of a trained teacher. As Blake Hannah concluded, homeschooling parents are delighted to spend time with children. We generally possess at least basic math and literacy skills, and are ready to learn more, if necessary. We are also open to learning from mistakes, and we are open to giving and receiving support from like-minded friends. She boasts that for teaching, love is the single most important nourishment, as important as water is to make plants grow strong and healthy. Imagine a situation where the teacher or instructor is able to facilitate the learning of children who eagerly anticipate each lesson. They could give one-on-one attention to each child being taught every day at school without getting a headache at the end of the day. They could empower each child to manage their own learning, so much so that he or she could be left unsupervised, and the instructor or teacher would return to find each child completely engaged in the lesson, ready to provide a verbal report on progress made and lessons learned with glee in their eyes. Sounds too good to be true? This is in fact a day in the life of homeschool. May I add, random and regular trips to the river, to the museum, or to the Taino village to receive immersive lessons about rock types, Jews who came to Jamaica, and meet descendants of people who came before, coupled with regular cross-age playdates and lots of time to engage in vocational skill-building activities. Homeschool demands its own legal framework, established through collaboration and consultation with actual homeschoolers. We believe in maintaining the integrity of the teaching profession, but the role of parents is not equivalent to the function of teachers in a formal school setting. We recommend that the definition of homeschool not be misconstrued as a representation of the formal school system, and that the role of a parent who homeschools not be conflated with that of a trained teacher. We generally recommend that references to parents in the homeschool setting be excluded from this bill. As Lady Blake Hannah puts it, the home is still the place where most learning happens. In an age of Google, YouTube, Abeka, Jollyphonics, Curiosity Stream, Nebula, Life Academy, and High Flyer. Teaching and learning is less about the academic qualifications of the instructor or facility and more about facilitating the development of a child's academic independence and emotional quotient through humility, patience, and a willingness to listen. According to the National Home Education Research Institute, there is significant evidence that homeschool children generally have performance rates above average due to factors such as small group classes and explorative, independent, and child-centered learning rather than the certification of the parents. It has been determined in other jurisdictions that parents should not be mandated to maintain a certain level of academic certification to homeschool. Instead, parents should be facilitated in the process of homeschooling through improved access to resources and learning tools. We therefore recommend that existing regulatory bodies concerned with effective parenting be empowered to provide more guidance to parents, rather than reclassifying the role of parents in a way that could restrict the rights and privileges of good parents. Homeschoolers should also be encouraged to collaborate with the existing independent schools unit at the Ministry of Education to create a legal framework that guides parents who homeschool and supports homeschooling with educational resources and tools needed to facilitate learning. We also continue to support the work of state agencies such as the Child Protection and Family Service Agency and other lobby groups that seek to protect the rights of children and advocate for the proper nurturing of our sons and daughters. In summary, 1, we object to the conflation of the homeschooling parents as part of the teaching profession. Homeschooling is not a replication of what occurs in the classroom setting, and homeschooling parents should not be grouped into the Act's definition of teacher. 2, we object to the application of the bill in its entirety to homeschool families, specifically Section 4, which speaks to the application of the Act, that's subsection 1E and 2, Section 29, speaking to the eligibility requirements for authorization to teach, and that's in subsections 3 and 4, and Section 37, speaking to the application for authorization to teach. Homeschooling parents should not be required to pay a fee to undertake a task that is more an extension of the parenting function than a branch of the teaching profession. 3, we welcome the continued partnership already established between the Ministry of Education's Independent Schools Unit and homeschooling parents to uphold high standards of educational development of homeschool children, and we are committed to supporting the government in the development of relevant regulatory systems that protect the rights of children and parents who wish to engage in the practice of homeschooling. Again, we are grateful for the opportunity to address this Joint Select Committee and hope that our comments today would have confirmed the wisdom in excluding the broad topic of homeschooling from the JTC bill. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Mr. Panton, Mrs. Panton, as well. Just a quick question on your number 2 objection. I don't know if you had sent in an updated, but this, in the written submission, it only refers to section 37, but as you were speaking, you mentioned some other sections as well. So I don't know if they're...
Yes, the document also mentions section 4.
Pardon me?
The document you have should also...
It's not on this one. Unless there was an updated submission. Yeah, but the one that I have does not have that. Right. It's mentioned in the body, but not in the summary.
The original submission should, you should see the mention of those sections of the bill in it.
Okay. Thank you so much. And what we're going to do, we're just going to take all the submissions because, you know, there might be similar sentiments across the different entities and persons. And so that is what we will do. But just before I do that, Mr. Panton, just a question, you don't have to answer it right now. If a parent is illiterate in the normal definition of same, should they be allowed to homeschool? And can I go on to the next presenter, please? I'll allow you to come back to that. And when you're presenting, we're just asking you to speak directly into the microphone because we're taking minutes of the meeting.
My name is Lyndall Vitale. Thank you for allowing us to present today. My wife is Rashida. We will be presenting a little bit more on a personal basis as well as things in the Act. So the introduction, we are a family of homeschoolers who sincerely appreciate the provisions of the JTC bill in its attempts to professionalize the teaching profession. We officially began our homeschooling journey in 2016 after a series of incidents with, at the time, my wife's son, the child's teachers, and her deliberate misrepresentation of stories told to her supervisor. Thankfully, after bringing the incidents to the principal and series of meetings, she eventually admitted to the untruthful. He was 6 years old at the time. These incidents ultimately scared our son, and prior to our departure from the traditional system, he was pleading to us to homeschool him as he was terrified to attend school. He would often explain that preferred learning was with the family was opposed to school. Please bear in mind, this was a vetted teacher with many years of expertise and training in a well-established institution. I say to this, abuse can take place at any level, at any time, at any character. It is our responsibility as a family entity to serve and protect our children. At this point in our life, we made a decision that ultimately changed the course of our life. Every choice thereafter became easier, remaking family decisions and creating a stable environment, one in which our child may thrive and be encouraged to be an independent learner. Since then, we've proceeded with psychometric analysis, which further recommended homeschooling as the best means for educating our child. Our son has been an active participant in his own education and has maintained year after year that he wishes to continue to homeschool, and he is now 13. We would like to clearly state that we do not school at home. We are instead a family dedicated homeschoolers who have chosen to educate our child. So, point 1, best interest of our children on page 2. Is this an indicator that parents do not have the best interest of their children at heart? A case being assumed to be guilty until proven otherwise. This bill, if passed, may trespass on the rights of the primacy of the parent. As a family unit, it is our fundamental liberty to choose our child or children's upbringing, provide education in a manner that is best suited for the child, nurturing, supportive environment, socialization, imparting religious education, keeping them safe, provide medical care on their basic needs to sustain life, hoping to prepare our children for a successful future in being contributing and upstanding citizens for their nation. On page 28, section 29(2)(b), do we need to be trained, assessed, and acquire qualifications in order to teach our children from birth to school age? Prior to conceiving children, do we as people need to have an assessment to be certified as fit parents to raise a child? Prior to us becoming parents, it was not required of us to be certified to bring a child into the world, nor to educate them from birth. Why do we need to continue further? The onus has been on us as a family to extensively research, prepare, and establish systems that best suit our children's needs, which does not preclude training and other developmental activities that we as a family embark on and wholesomely as a wholesome activity. We recognize that since inception, the role of parent/teacher began as the home is the first source of education. Page 8, section 4.1e. This act does not apply to a person who teaches on an ad hoc voluntary basis without pay, reward, or other consideration. And with that, parents do not get paid to teach their children, nor other people's children in a homeschool or cooperative setting. This bill precludes the possibility of families cooperatively educating their children. This is a methodology that has been greatly beneficial to us and other homeschool families, and it encourages multilateral socialization and peer-to-peer learning, as this usually consists of several age ranges harmoniously learning and sharing. Also, STEAM-based education, creative thinking, kinesthetics, and experimental learning, which to the best of our understanding is a concept which the MOE endorses. Taking into consideration the revised NSC curriculum, which places on the emphasis of STEM-based learning. Point 4, the bill in effect is also suggesting that the organized educational gathering of Sunday school would require certified theological teachers in order to impart knowledge among the brothers and sisters of the young ones. 4-H clubs and other similar in nature will only be able to utilize certified teachers to carry out the instructions, moving away from the norm of skilled experts being a means of imparting knowledge. We have found that as a family, we have been able to successfully home educate and seek out assistance and valuable insight from reputable professionals that we have carefully investigated prior to them having any interaction with our child. Honestly speaking, we have never cared about the level of certification received by any of his tutors. We instead place a strong emphasis on a proven track record, quality of service, and relationship. Notwithstanding, it's nice to know that they do have, but it's more significant to know that they have done and can do. Our son's results continue to be a positive indicator of this rationale. And down below you have a chart showing the traditional certified, alternate, and uncertified parents, that their levels seem to be in line. Point 6. In the JTC, if the JTC will now regulate us, is it that the MOE will be providing subsidiaries as it does for other independent schools and public schools? And addressing approved home education program. What is an approved home education program? Homeschooling is as diverse as it is complex, just as each child is. Our son was of the age to start grade 7 last year. Had he been in public school, that is what would have been. However, in his advanced, he has taken some grade 7 and some grade 10 courses. With this said, how do you propose to create an advanced home education program for each child and their individual needs? What is the JTC's definition of approved learning objectives? Number 8, the CBP framework. Do we as parents need to acquire our degree in education and get re-educated and matriculated year in order to be able to teach our child as teachers do? Therein making the choice to homeschool as the secondary level, we would need, again, qualifications for each subject. Bearing in that fact, we cater specifically to our child's needs. Page 2829 2B, section 2829 2B. Do we need to be trained assessed, and acquired qualifications in order to teach our children from birth to school age. 2E, prior to conceiving, do we as parents need to have an assessment to be certified as fit and proper parent to raise our child? And point 10, section 10.2, and on page 72, 1B, that's B1, clearly outlines and states that excludes us as parents within homeschool setting. In submission, we hereby submit to put our consideration to this committee and the legislators that any and all provisions therein related home education to be removed from the bill entirely without prejudice, including references to approved home education program requirements of licensing. These specific provisions represent what may be viewed as an intrusion of the JTC into homes and the affair of private family life, as well as being more likely than not to the detriment to the best interest of scores of children and their families in the pursuit of education. Furthermore, we recommend that the duties of homeschool parents be given exempt status under the interpretation portion of the bill at section 2B.
Thank you so much, Mr. Vitale, making representation for the Vitale family. And we will move next to, who will be next? Ms. Murphy? All right, wonderful. Please
Yes.
go ahead. Yes.
Sorry. Madam Chairman, Joint Select Committee, a pleasant good morning. I am grateful for the opportunity to present not only on behalf of my homeschooling family, but also other homeschooling families who share similar sentiments. Read my submission. I'd like to first highlight, before I start, that while the structure of my first submission is, and the changes a little bit, like the closing, I had put it at the start this time, but the content remains the same, with a little bit of additional examples. The Jamaica Teaching Council Bill does not consider homeschooling and the multiple ways the homeschooling in Jamaica, but simply mentions that it applies to parents who homeschool. Homeschooling as practiced was not on the minds of those who were discussing and writing the JTC bill's objectives, which is clearly listed. The objectives set the tone for the entire bill, which is to establish and maintain professional standards for the professional teachers and regulate their professional conduct while creating and enabling an environment for professional development. It is in this light that we, my family, as a homeschool parents, request that home education program, parents who homeschool, and anything related to homeschooling be exempt from the Jamaica Teaching Council Bill. It has always been an easier path to take when one is doing something that feels traditional, accepted and done by majority. Easier to follow what has been developed as a routine for most and has become almost nostalgic, the smelling of new wrapped books, counting sharpened pencils and capped pens, freshly sewn and ironed uniform, polished shoes, seeing old friends and meeting new. There is the anticipation, new promises and new goals. It is what most Jamaican families experienced and is automatic and desirable for most. It is what most families know, and so it's easier and feels logical to send your child to school outside of the house. Homeschooling, which has been practiced throughout history, and in various countries has been new to most, especially before the COVID pandemic. There is a suspicion towards something different, and very often as homeschool parents, we find ourselves being faced with a barrage of critique and unresearched statements presented as facts. Sometimes it feels like swimming upstream. We, the Murphy family, have learned to be patient and not become defensive, but instead use the opportunity to explain what homeschooling is, why the family homeschool, and as much as there is a need for public and private schools in Jamaica, why some families should be allowed to homeschool their children too. Homeschooling for us is a parent-directed, individualized learning experience that happens within, but not limited to, the home. And although we will have tutors for some subjects, our children's education is our responsibility. So much our responsibility that we as a family is concerned about the Jamaica Teaching Council bill being reviewed by the Joint Select Committee. And 1, anything relating to homeschooling is sparsely mentioned, that one cannot help but interpret that the inclusion of parents who teaches and home education program felt like an afterthought. The clearly listed objectives included homeschooling. There's nothing in Part 1, preliminary Section 3, A to BV, pages 7 to 8, that as me as a homeschool family, we can say that it applied to us. However, immediately in Section 4.1, this act applies to, homeschooling was remembered to be included. Our family cannot help but ask the questions: for whom the Jamaican Teaching Council bill was written, and also eligibility requirements for authorization to teach, Section 29, pages 27 and 28, primarily fit and proper to teach. All right, points to consider. A, homeschooling and anything related to homeschooling wasn't a part of the bill's objectives. In the main objectives of this act are to Part 1, preliminary Section 3A to BV, pages 7 to 8. The phrases teaching as a profession, teaching profession, professional were mentioned about 5 times. The word teachers, as defined by the bill, was mentioned 5 times, and 4 of that 5 times mentioned were the same sentence with professional. However, the word homeschooling, homeschooling programs, home education programs, parents to teach, or anything at all relating to homeschooling was mentioned no time at all in the objectives. B, the JTC bill doesn't address the various approaches, concerns, needs center around homeschooling in Jamaica, nor is it in the bill where the aim is to collaborate and improve homeschooling in Jamaica, but rather it focuses on teachers, as defined by the bill, instructors, members in the teaching profession. The bill, not including the definitions, that is, emphasizes teaching as a profession, teaching profession, being professional in the context of professional development, professional conduct, etc., mentioned it at least 54 times throughout the bill. Teachers, instructors, and making references to other members of the teaching profession, such as Dean of Discipline, guidance counselors, principals, etc., at least 260 times in the bill. However, homeschooling was sparsely mentioned 5 times, and in the context that 1, the JTC bill applies to homeschooling, although an overwhelming number of pages and time were dedicated to professionals and the formation and management of the JTC board. Parents getting authorization to teach and making reference to someone applying to teaching position in an approved home education program was just mentioned. And so I'd like to highlight that the time spent developing the bill regarding teachers and making professional standards and the effort that went into creating that, the homeschooling family deserve that too. And so putting it and saying that the bill applies to homeschooling families, but not seeing the same amount of effort and research done makes it feel as if it was an afterthought. Fit and proper to teach. We have been homeschooling, my family that is, we have been homeschooling for 9 years. Should you only count the age appropriate to attend school outside of the home. However, we can say that we have been homeschooling since our children took their first breath and we carry them home. Teaching our children to communicate starts with the first feeding and touching. The lessons begin then. Our Jamaican early childhood curriculum guide recognizes and expresses that our children are learning so early and learning all the time. Curriculum guide from children birth to 3, page 7, V11, II. So the parents and the family are the first and primary teachers for children. The day we became mother and father parents is the day we also started teaching. It's a humbling and honorable position to be in, to not only parent, but to teach and guide our children. It almost sounds redundant to say parent and to teach and to guide, because to parent is to teach. And as we provide daily lessons to our children as early as infancy, the parents are learning as well. With each new stage from birth to 3 months to 6 months to 1 year, etc., we were learning how to be better parents and teachers, meeting our children's individual needs and understanding how best they learn. It required us to speak with our parents, our doctors, read articles and books, researching within and outside our community. Our children aren't the same they were 3 years ago, and each change and new stage come new learning needs and desires, which means more conversation, more listening, more research, and learning new approach. This learning journey for us and our children did not stop at 3 years old. Using the same determination from birth to 3 years old, we broke down the local curriculum by term, and then by months, and then by theme. It required late-night researching on various teaching methods to decide which was best suited for our children and our environment. It meant being intentional to create activities that will invite others to join us so our children could be amongst their peers. The experience is empowering and humbling at the same time. We also learn to appreciate our teachers who are teaching a large class. We cannot fathom teaching more than our own children, and maybe that's why they go to teachers' colleges and universities. The classroom management needed to be in place to teach so many students at once, writing up lesson plans for the class in the hopes that all will understand, and afternoon classes for those who don't. The limited opportunities to slow down on a topic, which may take class temporarily off course until the child understands the concept properly. As homeschool parents, we understand how challenging such a job may be and why specialized training is needed for someone teaching a large class. We, however, have individualized timetable and schedule for our children. Classes are one-to-one attention-based. If our children do not understand a concept, we explore other ways to teach the lesson until our children understand. There's no rush to move on to another topic, especially if the current lesson is fundamental to understand before moving on to the next stage. All this doesn't require a degree to do, but rather a dedicated and determined parent and honesty. If the parent is unable to teach a subject, he or she can seek assistance. D. Considering the objectives and theme tone of the JTC bill and the very little highlights of homeschooling mentioned, what was the research carried out to gain understanding of the various homeschooling approaches in Jamaica and the homeschool environment? I encourage that another alternative be explored than to place homeschooling in the Jamaica Teaching Council bill, which hasn't captured or represent homeschooling in Jamaica. I suggest a conversation can commence on the way going forward for homeschooling in Jamaica, which should involve the necessary parties, homeschool families, groups and associations that represent homeschooling families, and the department in charge of registering homeschooling and any other stakeholders. This also means to pause any changes to policies and the Education Act that is in relation to homeschooling in Jamaica. For to regard the best interests of the homeschooled child will mean thorough research, conversation, and collaborating with families so that the right document will be in place that captures the integrity of homeschooling and is beneficial to the homeschooled child living in Jamaica.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your comments. And I'll call on Ms. Rattigan now to, not Ms. Rattigan, no?
I'm Danielle McNish. Ms. Rattigan isn't here today.
Ms. McNish, go ahead.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee, the technical team, fellow homeschoolers. Madam Chair, may I please ask a question? I don't know if this is the right protocol, but it significantly impacts my presentation, in fact, all of our presentations. May I ask the question?
Sure, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So we submitted a group, or we sent in a group submission. From the meeting last week, you gave a clarification which came from the technical team, and I'm quoting here. The ministry already has in place its independent schools unit to treat with approval for home educating. If a parent will be teaching his child, no license or authorization is required. However, if an individual will be brought in the home for the purpose of teaching, then that person will need the requisite license and authorization. We were in that meeting, the explanation was that was the intention of the bill. However, there are points at which parent is being required to have a license and authorization to teach. It's definitely in the bill. So now I'm wondering what's going on, really, because that explanation completely contradicts the clauses in the bill, particularly Section 4, subsection 1E, which says this act applies to a person who teaches in an approved home education program, including a parent who teaches his own child and no other child at home. So I'm wondering, was what you said last week true? Is that what the intention of the bill is?
Please carry on with your presentation while
Okay.
I find that.
All right. I'm a mother of 3 exceptional children who have been home educated since birth. I don't have a school horror story, as my reason for choosing home education for my family was just off pure research. I wanted to have a close-knit family, to be connected to my children, and homeschooling, based on what I researched, offered that. I also wanted to give my children a foundation of learning that helped them to understand that learning was a lifelong pursuit. In the words of Erica Badu, who also was a homeschooler, knowledge is infinite. I didn't want my children to think that knowledge or learning or any kind of education only happens within the 4 walls of a school, only from prescribed texts or from schedules that were set up for someone else, set up by someone else for them. I wanted them to understand that every moment of every day is an opportunity to learn. You can learn from anyone, from the guy packing your bags at the supermarket to the old lady on the road. Learning is happening all the time, and you shouldn't neglect yourself any opportunity to learn. It is our view that the explanation provided last meeting was not articulated in the bill, and that in fact Section 4(1)(e) contradicts that explanation entirely. If the response given is indeed the intended provision regarding home educating families, we suggest that all references to home education and approved home education program be removed from this bill and given some other treatment. During the pandemic, many parents were struggling because they were attempting to do school at home, not homeschooling, not home education. This is because home education is not about the location where the learning takes place, nor is it solely buoyed by academic pursuit. Homeschooling involves a specific dedicated approach by parents and children, by the family, to learning and living. It is an approach that centers the relationship with the child, centers the needs of the child, and uses these to facilitate optimal learning and development of that specific child. In this way, parents are connected to the process of meeting the child where the child is, and this ability by the parent is not a certifiable, licensable, or measurable on paper kind of characteristic. In fact, many parents do not even possess it before they become parents. But through continuous presence and interaction with their child over time, their knowledge and understanding of that child they have increases, and that connectedness characteristic becomes cemented, and then continuously grows. As it is added on to by further engagement with the child, traversing through their acquisition and expression of learning as the years pass. I hereby submit that it be put to the consideration of this committee and to the legislators that any and all provisions pertaining to home education be removed from the bill entirely. Specifically, this would include Section 4, subsection 1E, also Section 4.2, Section 29, subsection 1. All right, other concerns. We are cognizant of the fact that where there are hired private teachers, as per parental choice within a home education scenario, it may be important that these persons be duly qualified and licensed to the extent that this bill will require. However, it must be stated, as we have witnessed comments to the contrary in this said forum, that most, if not all parents, especially home educating parents, who seek the services of private tutors do so with their own set of procedures and due diligence to determine the eligibility and safety of such individuals, primarily by personal reference and recommendation from other families with which the tutor had been engaged. We are aware that there may be many reasons why legislation is being implemented to regulate this aspect of the educational environment, and so believe that the changes suggested above or prior satisfy this need on the part of the system with respect to private tutors from the perspective of home education. However, to imply that parents do not vet such individuals and that somehow the standards and process of licensing arising from this JTC bill is or will be superior to the kinds of checks that parents generally do on their own is somewhat disrespectful. We would love to see some data regarding criminal or other negative occurrences arising from such private arrangements that would lead anyone to imply that the safety of children and families have been so gravely threatened by private tutors that a criminal background check is now required before seeking to engage one such individual. Though it may escape the members of this committee for no other reason than lack of exposure to homeschooling, as Jamaican home educating families with decades of on-the-ground experience, unquestionable measurable success, and a plethora of research on and about home education as a global practice, we proffer that based on the definition provided for an approved home education program and what we know of the current registration process under the Independent Schools Unit, the definition is very limiting to elective home education, as it purports a school-at-home approach, which attempts to recreate a classroom, sometimes to the point of desks lined up in a row, as well as relying on textbooks, workbooks, teacher-focused lectures, and traditional testing methods. It is with this knowledge that we as a collective still have grave reservations regarding the fact that elective home education as a practice based upon parental and family involvement that offers range and depth in the approach to learning and child development is not being given full and proper contemplation. Amendments to the other enactments which appear in the 6th schedule. We note that the 6th schedule of the Jamaica Teaching Council Bill 2022 proposes to effect 3 key changes to the Education Act, notably which will seek to give some specific designation to the practice of home education. The changes are the insertion of a definition for an approved home education program in Section 2, and the deletion of the words "or otherwise" and substitute the words "or through an approved home education program" for both Section 21, subsection 1, and Section 22, subsection 1. Firstly, these changes will severely limit the educational options available to families. To remove "or otherwise" would make way to preclude all forms of private education and alternative education arrangements. The definitions in both the Education Act and the Education Regulations 1980 speaks primarily and specifically to the statutory system of public education and its administration and to public educational institutions. They do not specify private schools or any other alternative education arrangement as being viable and available choice for families. Therefore, the "or otherwise" in the Education Act is what captures that. We believe that given global education trends, it is important that legislation reflects and maintains parental right to choose the right kind of education for their child, but also that legislation embodies a spirit that does not limit or too greatly narrow the scope of options families may take for the optimal development of their children. We submit that "or otherwise" includes but is not limited to private schools, online distance learning, which is actually omitted in the definition of an approved home education program. So if approved home education program replaces "or otherwise," then essentially online distance learning would now be illegal. We submit that "or otherwise" includes but is not limited to private schools, online distance learning, the phenomena of flexi schools, alternative self-directed learning and micro schools, special needs facilities, internships, mentorships, trade schools, as well as elective home education. To remove "or otherwise" and replace it with an approved home education program would limit the adaptation of any future education methodology or modality that may be wholly beneficial to the education environment, and also set the stage for the need to either amend or create further legislation to reflect such changes or inclusions in the future. At this point, we recommend that there be a view to develop specific legislation as a treatment alluded to earlier that will properly situate home education, possibly by way of a Home Education Act or bill that will adequately give provision for home education programs for children, as well as safeguard parental rights to choose home education. Within our suggestions for our home education bill, we would love to see the implementation of a home education council as a dedicated unit to regulate and support home education families and their children from birth. We'd also like to see the streamlining of the procedures for transition from or into the formal education system. We'd like there to be provision of training for officials in conjunction with the home education community. And this is a particular stickling point for me. I would love to see that this unit be dedicated to gathering, analyzing, and presenting data specific to home education in Jamaica. As an alternative to such a bill or act, since we note that developing legislation is an extensive endeavor requiring time and financial resources, we strongly recommend the development of a guidance on elective home education as a policy position by the government to include some similar aims as the suggestion of the Home Education Act, but not as much scope. The guidance could frame clear written policy about home education, defining elective home education and other home education styles, highlighting that home education is a viable and available choice for families, outline the procedures to transition out of public or private school in order to home educate, and explain things such as the parental financial responsibility for home education of their child, including the cost of any public exams. Ultimately, either of these two recommendations, a bill or act, or a guidance, will result in a position where families who wish to educate their children at home can do it well and are helped to do so, that educational quality is encouraged. Home education deserves specific treatment, as only a dedicated and documented policy position can provide. We suggest that conversation can commence on the way going forward for home education in Jamaica, which of course should involve key stakeholders. And I'd just like to answer the question that you asked of Mr. Panton, Madam Chair. I believe that a parent who is illiterate, who genuinely wants the best for their child and is also committed to their own self-development, should be allowed to homeschool their child. I played in my first chess tournament a month ago. I was taught by my 7-year-old and my 5-year-old. Never played chess before, didn't know anything. And I can say categorically that I know so much now about dinosaurs, black holes, and all kinds of things because of my children. And I think that's one of the things that a lot of persons don't realize about home education. It's not just about the child. Yes, the child is the center, but parents are learning all the time too, because you're learning alongside the child. Roina, my fellow homeschooler, spoke about the fact that she does hours of research trying to develop her curriculum for her children. That's a part of what we do as homeschoolers. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And I think we have one final presenter? Or that's it? Okay, all right. Committee members, Member Rodriguez.
Okay, let me just switch over here. Yeah, the hands are. Okay, okay. Sorry, I touched it again. Okay, here we go. So thank you, first of all, for taking the time to and express your opinions, because one of the things that we never want to happen is that the stakeholders who are affected by this getting the opportunity to have their voices heard. And let me just start by saying, personally, I am for homeschooling. My older sister homeschooled 3 of her 4 children. One of them could have benefited, I think, from homeschooling, but I never felt I had the capacity to homeschool. And that is, for me, the place I start in responding to you, in that I think my daughter, even though if she had different parents, she could have benefited from homeschooling. I think the formal education system did her better justice than I could have done if I allowed myself to take on something I was not capable of. No, so I had to say that we're definitely, I am personally for homeschooling. Now, the fact that the committee, we closed off submissions weeks ago. We closed off submissions and we reopened it because we see this as important. And the reason I'm mentioning this is because several of the the submissions today were made with an implying to some extent that we are not for homeschooling or we're anti-homeschooling. I want to state clearly that we are not, or we would not have reopened submissions for this, because we should have been working on the matrix, but we think we have all thought this is important for us to hear. We don't have to agree, but we want to hear. So I just want to dispel any ideas that we are not for homeschooling. Now from there, I have a few questions, and they may be rhetorical or you can respond if you so desire. But there are two things. And it goes to what? I can't see your last name, and I didn't get it. What's your last name, Danielle?
McNish.
Okay. Ms. McNish, you responded to the question asked by Minister by saying even if someone is illiterate, they should be allowed to homeschool. I 100% disagree. Because while homeschooling is not in itself a practice to replicate what happens in the classroom, we still have a right to protect children at any cost. In this process, we must always err on the side of protecting the child, not religion, not parental preference, but what is best for the child. If we allow someone who is not able to read and write to a particular level to be responsible for educating our child, our children, the country will pay the price for that in the future. Even if not in the now, the country will pay the price. And as policymakers, we have to ensure that our children, which form the now and the future of the country and its mere existence, is always protected. And so I hear you that the bill may not, I think Ms. Murphy said it's as though the bill treats homeschooling as an afterthought. And personally, I'm going to give you that. I don't think it was an afterthought, but I'm going to give you that. Because when you look at section 4 of the bill, it does make you wonder that. And if you look at certain other sections, it's as though it's just there without it being fully fleshed. And what I will say is, this committee and the technical team from the ministry, we need to go back and look at some sections to ensure that we really flesh out the ideas of homeschooling. But we cannot allow persons who can barely read and write to impart a form of curricula to our children. Under no circumstances should that be allowed. It would be careless of any government to do that. And secondly, how do we protect children in the home from child abuse in any form? We saw during COVID that there was an increase in child abuse cases because for many children, school is the safe space. Even when they don't want to express that something is happening, their teachers and guidance counselors are able to map it out and say something is going on, and that's how they help these children. So we need to think about it, and that this bill is also trying to protect our children from abuse. So what we have to do is maybe revisit the bill and see how do we, it cannot be blanket where we're told the government has no place in homeschooling. We have a place, and we will always maintain that place in the effort to protect our children from abuse and ensuring that they are taught properly. Now, homeschooling has been banned in over 24 countries across the globe, and there is a reason for that. So what we have to do is find a way where we look at what the potential pitfalls are and try and fix those. But to ask us here today to not govern homeschooling, personally, that will never get my vote in this committee. We must govern what happens to our children to some extent. Now, Section 21 of the Education Act, Mr. Panton, you mentioned it. And I just want to say, reading it for myself, and you saw when I went over to the attorney there, I don't agree with you that it is in conflict. I think it actually is requiring that homeschooling, the use of the term at the end or otherwise, it is actually requiring that we consider homeschooling. But I want to turn our attention to Section 44, which none of you mentioned, of the Education Act. Section 44, and if Madam Chair will allow me, I'll just read it. In the exercise and performance of the functions assigned to him by this Act, and we know it's not him, we have a her, the minister shall have regard to the general principle that, so far as is compatible with the provision of efficient instruction and training, which means we can't allow somebody who can't read and write to teach our children, and the avoidance of unreasonable public expenditure, the wishes of parents are to be considered in the education of students. So right here, homeschooling would be accepted, but the instruction must be efficient. It requires efficient instruction and training. I'm not asking that parents who homeschool be qualified as teachers. I support you with that. But there must be some limit. If you can barely read, you should not be teaching your own children. So what we can do is revisit that's what I'm submitting. We can revisit to have a separate category for homeschooling, because parents do have something special. And parents, you're not trying to replicate the classroom. But it cannot be that you're exempt from any form of basic requirements. And I do believe all homeschooling parents should undergo a police record check, because we have to protect our children against abuse. And quite often, abuse is happening in the homes.
Okay, I see hands up over there. Go ahead, Ms. Murphy.
Hi, morning, right? Morning again. To answer the question, to answer the question as it relates to a parent being illiterate, I understand what you're saying, but that's just, you're touching on a parent who is teaching their child. And there are many ways to homeschool without the parent teaching the child. So if the parent feels inadequate, or if the parents feel that they need assistance, then there are other avenues to explore. So it will still be a homeschool. The child will be at home, but that parent could seek assistance from a registered teacher, a license. There are co-op groups. So there are many ways, hybrid ways. I realize that the bill touches on the parent who teaches the child, and there's also the bill touches on the parent who hired a licensed and registered teacher. But for example, I realized that it didn't really touch or capture other homeschooling. For example, parents who seek co-ops. It is, so it might involve 3 children, but we'll come together, and somebody who is more qualified would be the one who teaches the child for that particular subject, or multiple subjects. There's also the homeschooling way where I have 2 children, and one would be going at the high school level. To be honest, I'm not going to be teaching at the high school level because I recognize my limit regarding that. So we will so we explore other avenues where we'll get tutors who are licensed and certified. And so, which is why I said, but it's still a homeschool environment. My child will be at home. And so there are many, while I'm still homeschooling my son, So there are many ways within the homeschool environment that we can explore homeschooling, and that's all I'm asking, that we look at all the various approaches for homeschooling and not just limit it to just
No, and I agree with you, and you have mentioned all of them covered by the bill, because you said once you're dealing with outside persons, they are trained teachers, so we're fine. My only problem with what you have said is, what about the parent who don't realize they don't have the capacity? Because, and that's where the problem is, because you have spoken about recognizing, for example, you, Miss Murphy, you have recognized that you may not be the best person for your child for the high school. But what of the parent who does not accept that, who is so caught up in their own selves and their own abilities that they do not recognize that they can barely read and should not be teaching their child? So we have a responsibility to protect those children from the parents who do not recognize that they don't have the capacity. But everything else you have said, we have agreed. You notice you keep mentioning the other avenues where you reach out for trained persons to help. So we're on the same page, but that little group of people are where we have a problem.
All right, thank you. Ms. McNish, I know you have a question, but also you had asked about the response that was given in the ministry, and I took the time to go back to the minutes. And what it said was that I read the response from the Ministry of Education and Youth, that the ministry has the Independent Schools Unit to address approvals for homeschooling. I think when I look back, it was in the context of ad hoc versus the approved, what's it called, the approved home education. And the point that I went on to say, and she noted that no license or authorization was needed for a parent teaching their child on should really be on an ad hoc basis. But that if an individual was brought in to teach, that they would need the requisite licensing authorities, so that the ad hoc was the context in which that was said. But go ahead with your question.
Thank you. In relation to the abuse in homeschool, I don't know how many of the members are aware, but currently, if you are to register that you're a homeschooler, you can only do this when your child attains the age of 6, which is school age. If the government, if we are so concerned about abuse in home, if I as a parent decided to keep my child at home between 0 and 5, why is it that suddenly at 6 I need to do a police record if I want to keep them home longer? If it is that parents need to have a background check or some kind of police record suddenly when their child turns 6 to prevent abuse, then it seems as though the abuse needs to happen. It seems as if those police checks needs to happen when we're pregnant or before we become pregnant. Additionally, there is legislation in place to treat with abuse, trafficking, neglect of children.
Okay, Ms.
So when
McNish.
those things are offered as an excuse or a reason to suddenly have homeschoolers be on a platform and throw stones at them, I really take great offense to that.
No, Ms. McNish, I'm going to ask our legal person to answer the question. Is it that parents would be required to do criminal background check? I thought that's what Ms. McNish...
No, it was in response. It was in response to...
Madam Chair, she was responding to where I said part of what we're doing, we're trying to protect children who are potentially abused in the home, and I raised the issue of the increase in abuse during COVID, and that for teachers, they have to get a police check. And I'm saying personally, I believe if you're homeschooling, you should also be having to, if you're not going to be qualified as a teacher, because part of the problem is the bill is now saying you should have certain qualification to get authorization. If we remove that completely, we remove the requirement for persons dealing with children to have police records. So it's not that it's in the bill. It's my recommendation that even if we make changes, we should not take away the one where, and it's not specific, Ms. Danielle, to homeschoolers. Absolutely not. It's a general. And predators do not necessarily abuse 0 to 5 age group. You have some who likes 11 to 13, others who like 16 to 19, some who like 8 to 10. So.
All right. Member Flynn?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Let me first say that I think if a person is qualified, I think if they choose to homeschool, that they should. So I don't have a difficulty with the team here today if it is that persons in Jamaica wish to homeschool their child. However, I would want to agree with the Norwegian law. In Norway, we all know in those countries that they have some of the lowest crime rate, lowest poverty, as far as moral standard. I think we would all say we'd wish that we could be like a country like Norway. However, the Norwegian law, parents are allowed to homeschool, so as long as they give the children an equivalent education. I also believe that. Homeschooling, as they said, should be comparable quality to public education. And the education law grants the freedom of method in education, but goal and the education is of some, as far as there should be of the same, the curricula and the syllabi should be of the same. And I'm also in agreement, but I think what I'm hearing from the team here, I'm not sure. I think I want clarification. Is it similar as to what it is that you are teaching while you are at home as far as the syllabi, the curriculum may not be the same because, you mentioned various things. Morals, I think the moral argument I heard quite a bit from Mr. Panton and from also other family members here. But I think I would want to stress some of what Senator stated about there are parents, I believe, that are students that we should try to protect because even though children are being homeschooled, it doesn't take away that the parents are not going to beat them and mistreat them while they're at home. If a child can't learn and they're not understanding quickly enough, who knows what is happening in the home. And so while I heard Mr. Vitalis mention about an incident and, that's an unfortunate incident. We have bullyism everywhere, including in Norway. Persons, what I read, some of the reasons why parents choose to take their children from the formal education system is because of bullying and other factors. So it happens right across the world, and that is an unfortunate situation. However, this can also happen in the home, and I think we need to protect the children. I think that comes first. But I have to say that some of the things that I heard, these are also things that happen that you do at home. These are also things that happen, I believe, in schools, in many schools. Like my daughter, she's 5, and she goes to a Christian school. I'm not really in any church per se, and I think I wanted my child to get that, even though she gets it at home, that good moral standard. And I think that is the reason why I chose to send her to a church-based school because of their teaching principles. And so she also is teaching me chess because I don't know how to play chess. But it is a well-rounded school with the extracurricular activity, the field trips, etc. So it doesn't negate that, a child who goes to a formal school is possibly not getting what you are doing at home to be well-rounded. And so I kind of want to bring that point across because what I heard, it is almost saying that the traditional school does not offer some of the same things that a traditional school does. So I kind of wanted to just bring that point across. But I want to possibly ask, would you, the entire team, because I think I heard this from everyone, would you agree or disagree that not all who choose to homeschool may be in the best interests of the child? Because not all persons who choose to homeschool may be equal. And so I think this is why this bill is trying to protect that and to make sure. And, you know, I just would not agree at all that if I'm illiterate, that I should have that choice to homeschool a child. If I'm illiterate, what is it that I'm going to teach that child? And I think we must have some sort of a guide and standard for homeschoolers, parents who choose to homeschool their child, that it must be, and going back to my first point about the Norwegian law, that it should be equivalent, and the Ministry of Education should have some sort of a say. And even though you are the parent, and I'm the parent of my child, and should have the say about my child and how he or she is raised, and the moral standard, that is for me to do at home. But it shouldn't take away what should happen in the classroom. My child is also in a small school where the classroom, 2 teachers and about 20 children. And so again, you can get the same, and not all schools are equal. And so not all homeschools are equal. And we would want to make sure that the children, even though we're also moving away in our society where degree is not so important, we heard, I think it's Microsoft or whichever company is saying, you don't have to have a degree necessarily. And we're moving away from that. And it's more than just the books in general, just to teaching your child. But I think, for me, there should be some sort of a standard going forward. Because if you don't know the English properly, or you don't know math, how are you going to be teaching a child? I think we must have some sort of a standard going forward. And I totally believe that this bill will, sections in this bill will help with that, so that if it is that you choose to homeschool your child, that there is a standard to uphold going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Member. Ms. Panton, Mrs. Panton?
Yes. Good afternoon. Officially, is it afternoon? I have no idea. Okay, so hello to everyone. Really appreciate this forum.
Could you turn on the mic, or I don't know?
Not hearing? This one don't seem to be working. Okay. Hearing better? Okay. So, good day to everybody again. And again, I do thank you all for the opportunity that you have allowed us as a community. We are fully aware of how late our submissions were. And so we definitely appreciate your willingness to allow us to speak. And let me first establish, on behalf of my fellow homeschoolers here, as well as those who are not here physically, that we are in total agreement with a lot of what has been said. First, we definitely, and Mr. Panton stated it in his submission, that we are fully aware that without regulatory framework, anarchy will result. And that is definitely what we want to mitigate against. And so we are in no way implying that regulation is unnecessary or monitoring is unnecessary when dealing with a 21st century society. We are also agreeing that it is critical that the individual who is disseminating knowledge to the child must at least have some basic understanding of how to communicate to the child, have some foundational, conceptual basis on which they are disseminating knowledge. So we all agree with that, which is why one of my colleagues mentioned, I think maybe you may overlook it in the verbose delivery of their messages, that what we are suggesting is not that we are free of the monitoring or the need for regulation, or that any and anybody can homeschool their child, or in terms can teach their child. What we are saying is that in the homeschool, the parent is the facilitator, and as the Education Act Section 21 puts it, we are responsible for the management. The fact that we are managing the process of the child's education does not mean that we are integrally involved in the teaching of the child's education. Therefore, and we have already explained, because, and the school replicates this, the schooling environment, the auxiliary staff is a part of the school environment, right? The groundsman and the cook and the person who is allowed to sell from outside is a part of the school environment, and they are also teachers in the school environment in a very informal sense. So the point is that the parents can facilitate that education process in a myriad of ways. If they are able to provide the children with the textbooks, the resources that are necessary to disseminate the knowledge, that's one way. It does not necessarily require the direct input of the parent. We have a lovely book here. I'm not really paid to do this, but our forerunner, the eloquent, she's with us today, Barbara Blake Hannah, has illustrated how she, as a mother, facilitated the education of her child. Yes, she was, of course, she was an educated woman herself, but she illustrated how this process can be facilitated even in cases where the parent themselves are not academically at the level that they are facilitating the education of the particular child. Through tutoring, she expressed in her book of the myriad of books that she exposed Conan to throughout his life, and the wide range of experiences that contributed to his learning, that in fact saw him being taught by the community, right? So she was not the sole educator in his life. And so we have the real life examples to prove that this is the case. And so we are definitely agreeing with you on those points. We also agree that not every parent is fit to teach their child. Not every parent is fit to parent their child. And the state, unfortunately, is incapable, with all the resources that you may or may not have, incapable of policing all these issues, which is why we are seeing the effects of it now in the very school system that is established to support the nurturing of these said children. Because with all of your wonderful efforts, you're still unable to capture some of the challenges that begin in the home. So it's more than just a matter of good teaching by a parent. It is the issue of bad parenting that needs to be resolved. And therefore, we must focus our energies on how we resolve that problem of bad parenting. COVID saw a number of issues come to the fore. As a daughter of a mother who has years of experience at Bellevue Hospital as a nurse, and now working with the Ministry of Health in the area of mental health, I am very much aware and agree with you of the gravity of the situation that our children are facing in our world, in Jamaica here today. It is untenable. And the reality is that school or no school, that is happening, because the problem again is with the parent, and that is what we need to concentrate on. When we focus on imposing certain laws that further restrict those who are not necessarily the target of those very laws, we are not necessarily hitting at what the problem really is. I know of many cases, as I'm sure all of us here may have stories, of teachers who went through several challenges getting children to come online school. We see reports of over 120,000 children who were totally detached from the school system during the 2 years. And these are children supposed to be attending school. These are not children who were homeschooled. These are not children who were categorized as homeschooled. And so the issue is that we're still not capturing the problem and dealing with that issue of bad parenting. And I think that's where we need to focus. And that is why we turn our attentions as an association, as a body of homeschoolers, towards the existing bodies that seek to monitor parents. In other words, we would rather that the laws, the policies, the agencies that are established to monitor and regulate parents be the ones that we focus on in relation to homeschooling. Because we're more akin as parents to those policies. That long name, I don't remember it right now, but the OCA as we know it, and the OCR, the Advocate for Child Service, Child Agencies, or Children's Advocates, right? They have been there, and their main purpose is to deal with issues that you guys your members are highlighting in relation to the family. I think that is where the effort needs to be placed in terms of governing this unit, this family unit, because attaching us, and we really do feel like it's an appendage, attaching us to this particular bill that highlights more the professional teaching practice than the home practice is what creates the dilemma in our minds. So we're not opposed to regulation. We welcome it. We are all above scrutiny. We are because we want it to be known that what we are doing is legitimate. What we are doing, in fact, we would love if the government were in a position to use some of the practices, some of the approaches that we ourselves as parents have discovered. Mrs. McNish mentioned it so eloquently. We have discovered as parents. Some of those practices can definitely be adopted in the schools to widen the spectrum or the learning approaches that take place in the schools. Again, Barbara Blake Hannah O.D. has demonstrated in her book and through her own life how some alternative practices, schooling practices, can actually help to benefit children in school, not just in a homeschool setting. So we want to make it unequivocally clear. The ISU already has a system of regulation in place, and we are not against that system of regulation. We would love for more collaboration to take place between ourselves and the independent schools unit. There is a registration process in place that helps to mitigate against some of these issues that we are mentioning here today. And so we want those avenues to be explored rather than create a whole new set of regulations that don't necessarily address the heart of the homeschool. And that's essentially what we are asking. So I hope I answered some of the questions. Thank you again for the opportunity.
Thank you, Mrs. Panton. We have a speaking order here. Member Hamilton, followed by Member Brown, then Ms. McNish, and then Member Gale.
Thank you, Chair. So I've been listening to the conversation to date, and I believe we really don't have much of an issue. Why I say that is because when I look through the legislation, it is speaking to a person who teaches in an approved home education program, including a parent who teaches his own child and no other child. Based on the presentations I've heard, Mrs. Panton, you referenced facilitators, that parents are really facilitators within the homeschool setting generally. And the issue of the co-opt was introduced by Ms. Murphy in the homeschool setting. Now, what I'm not too clear about is whether the co-op system includes a parent teaching multiple children or third party teaching multiple children within the homeschool. Both. All right, so what I understand the legislation is trying to do, the mischief, is to ensure that the teaching component has a certain standard and that whoever is teaching is competent. Now, where parents are facilitators in the process, I believe there's no issue, because those persons who will be engaged to teach within the homeschool setting will be qualified and will fall under the legislation. The issue arises where a parent decides now to instruct and to teach his or her own child or children. In that scenario, I think is where we need to probably resolve certain issues. Is it that we're saying a parent who decides to teach his or her child should be exempt from the legislation and not require the qualifications being asked and the competencies? While I understand that it may be a bit of a stretch to have a parent be deemed a teacher or have the qualification of a teacher, I still think there's a minimum standard that must be required. So what we probably need to do is disaggregate that parent who teaches and identify what that standard is. If we do that, then I believe we will resolve the issue, personally. I also agree with Senator and member in relation to some of the things they mentioned. You know, I don't think that a person who is not literate should be given the authority to teach a child. Ms. McNish mentioned that she was in agreement, but when she said her children taught her chess, Ms. McNish, with the greatest of respect, you are not illiterate. No. Illiteracy in this sense is the ability to read and write. So if it is you don't fall under that definition of illiteracy, then you are a brilliant woman. What we don't want is for children to be exposed in a setting where parents cannot read and write. And the reality of our environment is that a lot of our parents cannot read. A lot of our parents, I have in my constituency, a lot of our parents cannot read and write. And we have to accept that as a reality. And that is what we are trying now to prevent our children being exposed to. So if we can resolve that little issue, Chair, in relation to the standard required for that particular parent who wants to teach, then I think we should be fine.
Thank you, Member Hamilton. Member Brown.
Thank you, Minister. May I start by thanking you, Minister, for facilitating the submissions from the homeschoolers. I thought it was very important. And in fact, my own presence on the committee had to do with the fact that I have a daughter who has a master's in teaching science from UWI, who was taught here in secondary school, who have taught abroad, and who is involved in homeschooling now. I have another daughter, an attorney at law, who was chosen to do homeschooling. And it's against that background that I want to welcome former senator who sits in the well while her name tag is over here, Barbara Blake Honor, one of the pioneers in homeschooling. big proponent of it. Her son, I believe at the age 11 or 12, was led on a technical part of assisting, advising the government on technology issues. Technology which, and at that time, technology was a strange thing. So I really want to thank you, Barbara, for pioneering the concept and leading. And it shows the power of an individual, because then it was probably one or two involved in homeschooling. We're now here now an association, jazz, of homeschoolers. And I want to ask, and I couch a question in this manner, about what percentage of the Jamaican population is now involved in homeschooling. It's much more than when Barbara started, but it's certainly far from the 500,000 in public school, but it's important. And I think if you could share that info with us, it would be helpful. Now, what I understand the homeschoolers to be saying, and Minister, let me just say this. One of my grandsons did a research about deserts in Namibia, and I thought that this was a university thesis. He's still primary school age, but that's a benefit he got from homeschooling. I know about Njomo and the liberation fighters in Namibia, but I didn't know about the Namib desert. So I learned that from him. I'm hearing the homeschoolers to be saying that there are different forms of homeschooling. I don't think anybody is coming here to say an illiterate person should teach them, but it's saying that an illiterate parent can outsource, can contract with people to do the teaching of their children, and that's one form. I'm aware, for example, that even from Jamaica, people are teaching children in the United States online. So there's the online version which teaches several children even here and abroad. So there are different variety of homeschooling, and so we should take that into account as we develop the bill. I hear them to be saying we need special legislation on homeschooling. We need to recognize that this is new, it's growing, and we need to give it guidance rather than lock it down. And so that's consideration I believe this committee ought to give. Before this presentation, we might have been satisfied with what is in the bill on homeschooling. I believe we're not going to be able to pass this bill before the House recess. I suspect it's going to recess, if it has not recessed yet, down there. So maybe over the summer we can give some thought at a policy level, at a legal level, to how we can fix the desire from the homeschoolers for more attention, more than 5 mention, you say? For more than 5 mention in the bill to homeschooling. I think it's possible and we should go there. Initially, I must say, I was a little weary. I have respect for religion, but I felt there was a challenge between existing school and homeschooling. I felt there was a challenge between the right of the state to assist everybody in education. I'm disabused of that now by the latter presentations. So forgive me if I initially felt a little unease, even though I had the experience of homeschooling. It was easy for me to say to accept my daughter saying, we are homeschooling these two. But I've seen the result from that homeschooling. And so, Minister, I am happy for the presentation. A lot of light was shed, and I look forward to spending some time rereading their presentation and fitting that into our discussion when we come to look at the matrix and the bill. Again, I close by thanking you for allowing the extension of time. Sometimes we put out requests for comment and they don't always come. But when we start the discussion, it stirs some controversy sometimes and it brings people into coming. And I want to thank all the homeschoolers, all of you, who came and made presentation. I believe it's going to make the bill a better bill, and it's going to make Jamaica education system much more modern and effective. And I thank you. I thank you, Minister. Those are the comments I want to make right now.
Thank you, Member Brown. Ms. McNish, do you wish to come in at this time after Ms. McNish, Member Gale, and Member Braham?
Thank you. I think Mrs. Panton alluded to it, or well, she didn't allude to it, she said it. We're not against regulation. We're not against having the state play a part in supporting homeschooling. What we're saying is that the JTC bill is not it. Based on the definition of an approved home education program, I would get locked up. My son does online classes for chess. He has a science teacher in Malaysia. Look at the definition. There are parents who actually have their children in writing programs where the teachers are not here in Jamaica. What we're saying is if you are to properly treat with home education, it can't be in this bill. There needs to be some thorough research done about the different kinds of home education and different types of alternative education that start in the home before home education gets tacked on to a teaching profession bill. That's what we're saying. Other than a home education act or bill, there can be a guidance on home education that fully fleshes out the policy of the government on home education. But just to put in an approved home education and you must do a police check, that's nothing, literally. It doesn't even begin to chip the tip of the iceberg of home education.
Member Gale?
Chair, you know, a joint select committee process in terms of reviewing a new legislation is always important. And it invites stakeholders to make their own representation. And I'm happy that this committee gave the homeschoolers an opportunity to respond to the issues. And I must say today that your appearance here seems like you're trade unionists because you all operated organized. As if you all met and decided to come with one theme. What it invites is consideration to be given, not only to this committee, but the ministry and this particular legislation around the concerns of homeschooling. I support homeschooling. What I don't support is the exposure to a child of any and every parent wanting to become a teacher, because no child should be left behind. And it is not every parent that can teach. Sometimes I even question if every teacher can teach, but that's another story. I want to be satisfied that if you have homeschooling, that child is going to be exposed to the curriculum, to the syllabus, to the time of day in terms of the subject areas and the teaching, and also the assessment to determine whether the status of the child as part of the education. Yeah? What you have raised are some thought-provoking concerns that I believe coming out of this ought to be addressed. We may consider, and I agree that homeschoolers ought not to be tagged on to a particular legislation But there ought to be some regulated approach towards homeschooling. We may even consider, and this is my opinion now, whether there's a developed, defined policy around homeschooling. But to get to that policy, I'm not going to promote and prescribe that the ministry on its own define such a policy without consultation and collaboration with homeschoolers. And so I thought it, Chair and colleagues, this is a very important deliberation today that invites other consideration, and I found it welcoming.
Thank you, Member. Member Braham is online.
Thank you very much, Minister, Chairman. I thank the representatives for the presentation, Minister, and it was very enlightening. I think that we ought to take, in relation to this bill, a minimalist approach. I don't think a bill that is designed to provide professionalization for teachers should also be used to deal with the regulation of homeschoolers and homeschooling. Secondly, we should also bear in mind whether or not, to the extent that we have homeschooling in Jamaica, whether there is a problem from the evidence and so on that need fixing. So the bill should not treat so far as regulating homeschoolers, but to the extent that they will have to use people from the public education or from a teacher to come in to teach, I can see that maybe we could require that those persons who will actually be employed or hired to teach, we could consider requiring them being professionalized under the bill. But I wouldn't go further than that. In this bill, if further work is required in relation to homeschooling, it would, I think, a separate bill should be developed for that purpose after due deliberations. That's my view. I would hate to outlaw homeschooling indirectly, especially if the limited version of homeschooling or the limited amount of persons who are doing homeschooling does not demonstrate a problem. Maybe homeschooling, that small group of persons doing homeschooling are doing excellently by and large. And therefore, if they don't demonstrate a problem, we should not fix it as far as I am concerned, save that if they are going to hire anybody from outside to come in to assist them and they are teachers, then they should be qualified accordingly. But apart from that, I would leave them alone. And if when necessary, we develop another bill to deal with homeschooling. Those are my thoughts, Minister.
Okay, Member Braham, may I ask you a question when you say leave them alone? Do you really mean that? And just wanted to bring to your attention the Independent Schools Unit at the Ministry of Education and Youth that provides some oversight. Yes, and
yes.
They have to be registered. They have to make.
But I say
known,
leave them alone. Leave them alone in the context that they now exist. In other words, until we develop detailed policy for them, whatever they are doing now under current law, they continue to do, and then supported by the fact that this teaching regulation may require outside persons going to teach those children to be certified. I mean, when I say leave them alone, that's what I mean. I don't mean that what we have now, we'll abandon it or anything like that. But I wouldn't want to add too much more without a proper policy consideration.
Or Ms. McNish?
Thank you. Currently, there's no actual policy other than a practice. It's not a written policy in terms of how the ISU treats with homeschoolers. If you call the regional office in St. James, you're going to get different information from the one that you call in Mandeville. This is one of the challenges that we're having. Sometimes you might call as a parent of a 3-year-old and say, hey, I'm interested in homeschooling. How can I get some support? Is there a website? Can I get a brochure or anything? Oh, call the Early Childhood Commission. You call the Early Childhood Commission. Oh, we don't do anything with homeschooling. We don't know anything about that. These are just a few of the challenges that we have, which is why we are of the view that there should be specific legislation or policy developed in relation to homeschooling, in addition to possibly the implementation of a homeschool unit. Part of the problem with ISU is that it deals with independent schools, private schools, and they don't really have a lot of time for us. Because we're not, it's not a whole heap of people. We don't have no sports day. We don't have all these exciting things happening. And so when you call, you may get somebody as well as you may not. So that's why we need a homeschool. We do. We've invited them, but we only have one. Whereas the private schools there are many private schools. So they have many sports days. But my point is, there needs to be a dedicated team within the ministry, because guess what? Especially coming out of COVID, homeschooling is growing. We don't know how many people are homeschooling right now. Even as an association, we don't know how many homeschoolers there are in Jamaica. Neither does the ISU, because not everyone is registered. And registration doesn't happen until age 6. So there are persons who are homeschooling right now who can't register. And at the same time, they're not able to get the support because the ISU cannot give them any support because their child is not yet 6. Which is why we're saying there needs to be policies specifically that will capture all of the issues, or at least more of the issues that we have. Just to say, okay, an approved home education program, we don't even know really what that looks like, because there's really no policy other than that definition that's inserted in this bill. There's no actual policy to say what that really looks like. Does it include unschooling? Does it include flexi schools? Does it include possibly wild schooling? There are many kinds of homeschoolers, I think Mrs. Murphy referred to earlier. So one of the other things is, it doesn't, because there's no proper policy regarding what an approved home education program is. So for example, I register my child and I send up my information with what my curriculum is going to be for the year. And I send this in September. And by January, I realized that the curriculum that I chose for my son is not working. We're trying, it's not working, we're ending up with tears. And I do my research and I say, well, boy, I found another program that I think can help me. And I want to try that program. What would be the procedure for me to now make an application to change that my initial submission as to what my learning plan was going to be for the year? These are the kinds of issues that would be fleshed out in a dedicated Home Education Act. And that is part of why we're saying that just to tack us on the JTC bill, it's not enough. It's not enough. If it is that the nation really wants to take a serious stance and provide a proper foundation and proper support for homeschooling, then it needs to be separate from this teaching profession bill.
Thank you so much.
Just a quick question.
Okay.
Yes, just a there we go, soft touch. Twice you have mentioned a gap in the bill, and I missed where you said it was, but it's in relation to distance learning. Where in the bill you referred?
In the definition of an approved home education program, it does not include
distance
online
learning.
Yes, which, you can see. I don't have to explain that one.
So you said in the definition of approved, okay. All right, thank you.
Okay, Mrs. Panton, you have a final comment?
Thank you again. Okay. For Senator, no. Gail, thank you. Right. You actually have a protege here as former trade union representative. in the Bank of Nova Scotia. Yes, so we do speak as a unified body, and we had no prior yes, we had no prior this discussion about our individual submissions, and I think that is the beauty in what we have here in this meeting and this joint. We again applaud you members for giving us the opportunity to express our individual views, and to through that experience realize the unity within the homeschool community. So that is something we are grateful for. To the question of the membership within the Jamaica Association of Homeschoolers, we are currently at approximately, I say approximately because we have persons coming in weekly requesting membership, persons who make their requests to be members of the association through the independent schools unit. So we already have that collaborative relationship with the independent schools unit. And we have about 57 families registered as a part of our membership, and it grows, as I said, weekly. And this only includes those who are official members, because we have partners who probably were members. We have families who choose not to be members, but they interact with us on a regular basis. And so it's a very dynamic group. Just want to add also that an earlier comment you made, dear Cuthbert. Yes, sorry about that. We are pleased that we are definitely a part of a democracy that allows us the freedom to speak in this kind of way, which is why I believe that it is critical for any regulatory framework that is to be developed take that collaborative approach. And we reiterate all that has been said by various members here, that this discussion should continue in developing that specific body of laws that governs the homeschool community. We actually, maybe individually, as well as a body, as an organization, have made several requests to the independent schools unit for a policy to be written. I know when I started out as a homeschooler 7 years ago, I was the one who sought the government out. So again, very opposed to the idea that we want to be left alone, in a different sense, is the idea that we want to ensure that what we do as homeschoolers can, again, as I said before, come under scrutiny. And we want to be guided, we want to be supported, and our members have made several efforts to do just that. I visited the Early Childhood Commission myself before my child was 6. I experienced a very similar situation as Mrs. McNish, where I was told that I have to wait until the child is 6 to get her registered. And so I was basically just on my own doing what I wanted, and until I discovered this noble organization of JAS. And as a body, we have been growing together, supporting each other, lobbying on each other's behalf, providing social experiences, social educational support to each other as families. And it has definitely been a blessing to our individual families. So we are very open to a policy framework, and we have done our best to the extent that we are able as regular citizens to garner support from the government in ensuring that what we are doing is really in the best interest of our children. That is our main concern, the best interest of our children, and nobody
Thank you, Mrs. Banton.
Can bless my child, can serve my child in the way that I innately was given that blessing to do.
Thank you, Mrs. Panton.
Shane, I will advise the group later that you led a demonstration today, and I can identify where you got your bucketive from.
Why, thank you, Member Gale. Member Miller?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Let me thank you, Jazz, for the presentation that they have made. I've learned a lot from it. I want to reinforce a point that the Madam Chair as well, I want to affirm Madam Chair because she was strident in ensuring that homeschoolers bring something to the table and discuss to this committee. So, Madam Chair, I want to affirm you where that is concerned. And what my colleagues stated, that without a shadow of a doubt, we insisted that you came here. And it shows from what everyone said, we're not against homeschooling. And we believe that every parent, especially that is seated here this morning, has a special interest for his or her child in terms of their child development. However, as a state, we have a duty to ensure that the proper procedures and policies are followed. And as a trained teacher myself, it's very important to ensure that the persons that are, although you have the passion and the zeal to ensure that the development of your child, but the state has a responsibility to ensure that the persons that are coming into your space, if you get facilitators to come in, that they are well trained and properly and they are in good standing to address to the need of your child. So just to reassure, and I'm sure Madam Chair will do that, the administration, the committee is not against homeschooling, but we have to ensure that it's structured and we have to ensure that policies are in place to strengthen the homeschooling. And I'm for even a department, Madam Chair, in the independent school that gears specifically for homeschooling, because sometimes the Department of Independent School only focus on independent schools, right? But the attention that is needed for homeschooling might not be there. I'm just saying with my limited knowledge. I'm not sure if that is the case, but I'm saying I'd recommend for a small department in the independent school division to focus on homeschooling. Thank you very much, Madam.
Thank you, Member Miller. Member Hamilton?
Just one last point, Chair, and thank you. I am definitely for policy being implemented. As Member Miller just said, I've learned a lot today about homeschooling. There is no legislation for it. I would love to see legislation governing this area of our education system. But the legislation we have before us is not to treat with that. And so while I'm agreeing that we need something separate to speak to how you operate, what this legislation is merely doing is just ensuring that we have some standards and competencies. I do agree that the definition is not sufficient to cover the approved home education program. And so I would advocate for some amendments to be made there. It is something that we can discuss further as a committee. But Chair, I would implore that we hastily develop some policy and legislation surrounding this so that we can move forward.
All right, so looks like we are at a close on this session. Let me join with members in saying that we certainly learned a lot, and we're glad that you took up the opportunity to write us and to come in personally when we invited you in to come in and make your presentations. I would like you to leave with the notion that we all sitting here, this government, believes, and that's how we will operate, that homeschooling is part of the ecosystem of education. And I believe by this discussion today, you would have taken homeschooling out of the shadows. And I think someone mentioned that. As it's as another way, it's another way of encouraging our children to learn. It's a different environment for them, or let's just say another environment, not necessarily different in that sense, but another environment. So we want you to leave with that. You know, we're not against homeschooling. We want it to continue to play its role. But as you're saying, there are gaps currently. And I heard you loud and clear in terms of the need for clear policy, guidance, direction. And as the Minister of Education and Youth, I can make that commitment to you that we will begin that process of developing policy for the homeschooling sector. Yes. All right. So with that, I want to thank you again, Danielle McNish, homeschooling mother, Lindell and Rashida Vitali, the Vitali family, the Jamaica Association of Homeschoolers, as represented by Mr. and Mrs. Panton, and Rena Murphy, the Murphy family, and Miss Hannah, who is hiding in the shadows. Please stand up and take a bow, Miss Hannah. Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you for being here. You're free to go. Yeah. So members, one final item. Members, we have a final item. Remember, we had deferred the minutes. Oh, Dr. Gordon, do you have a comment? Go ahead.
Minister, the members of Parliament, I just wanted to mention that education, 4 years of education, is now an international law, and governments can be sued if they don't provide 4 years of education to their populations. It's usually grades 1 to 4. And so when homeschool is being considered in any country, the homeschooling has to be regulated like the rest of the education system. And Member Flynn mentioned Norway, but the regulation is so for all of Scandinavia. And it is so in the Netherlands. I suspect generally in Europe, once education is offered at home, it's regulated. It's not, you don't just educate your people if you want to. On the board, though, Minister, we have 2 parents represented on the Jamaica Teaching Council board, and so that will support the suggestion for collaboration. And we agree we should collaborate with them. And then we'll have to look at the authorization to teach as it relates to the homeschool. We need to rethink that. Thank you, Minister.
I think we all agree that there has to be a minimum of regulation. There ought to be formal, there ought to be a policy, there ought to be regulations. I don't think there's any disagreement on that among members. All right, we'll turn.
Chair, the only thing I would say is, yes, parents are on the council, but that's different from a homeschooler. Different from a regular parent, I would think. So I think we need to revisit the how the body is made up and ensure that a homeschooler is included on it. It's something for us to deliberate at least.
We have two representatives, two persons representing parents. So at some point we can decide if the homeschoolers should be represented separately. So that's possible. That really is possible.
All right, we'll go to the minutes now. We'll begin from page 1. Page 2.
Yes, madam.
Sorry, for the recording you have to use a mic. Sorry.
On page 2, second to last paragraph, the second sentence that begins with the words, the chairman. It says, the chairman asked the committee whether the preamble was retained without amendments. I am wondering if it should be, the chairman asked the committee whether the preamble was to be retained without amendments. Because we had not yet had the discussion, so I just think the to be is missing between was. Sorry, on the item 7, page 2, second. So there are two sentences which begin with, at the beginning, with the chairman, the second one. The chairman asked the committee whether the preamble was retained without amendments. Okay, I'm thinking it should be retained. Was to be retained without amendments.
All right. And before that, item 5, second sentence starts with, she stated that the submissions would be read into the record, whereby the entities would be invited to present where needed. Yes, submissions would be read into the record. I think I was asking if it should be read into the record or we should bring them in. Yeah. All right, so page 3. Page 4. Page 5. Page 6, clause 2, interpretation, definition of approved home education program. This was a question. This was the section where that question came up in terms of what I said, that no license or authorization was needed for a parent teaching their child. It was in the context of the ad hoc versus the approved program, so I'd like for that to be clarified right there, that it was on an ad hoc basis, right? That sentence. She noted that no license or authorization was needed for a parent teaching their child on an ad hoc basis. That's correct, Dr. Gordon? That's correct? No license or authorization was needed for a parent teaching their child on an ad hoc basis. Is that correct or not? Did you hear her? I'm sorry, page 8. Page 9. Page 10. That's the end. Would a member please confirm?
So moved, Chair.
Confirmed by, seconded by Member Miller, Member Rodriguez. Okay. All right. Are there any matters arising from the minutes? None? Any other business? Date of the next meeting. So we have 3 dates, future meeting dates. Thursday, September 1 at 2 p.m. Thursday, September 15 at 10 a.m. 10 a.m. and Thursday, September 29 at 2 p.m.
There was a meeting set for another committee for September 1, but I understand that that date is being changed because there's some function. So,
Mr. Nash was just advised of that. Okay, so we'll send out a new date.
Yeah,
for the first week in September.
For all the dates and meetings we confirm.
All right, and so you'll get the usual email from Mr. Nash confirming these dates. All right. Yeah, the 15th and the 29th, and he will check to see what date would be available in that first week of September. Right, and with regards to the hybrid, we had already confirmed that our meetings will be hybrid going forward, rather than us having to request confirmation every week. All right. So let me thank you, members. Meeting is adjourned. Please enjoy the Jamaica 60 celebrations coming up, and have a good summer recess. Thank you so much for your attentiveness, for coming with all your questions and comments. It's been, to date, it's been enlivening. It has taught me more, and I think at the end of this, we'll have a significantly better bill. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Minister.
Out and join us! Jamaica's 60 Independence Float and Street Parade as we